everybody. Thank you so much for joining us. My name is Marquita Sams, and I'm excited about this conversation discussion that we're going to have about mental health and holistic healing after an organ transplant. And so, my goal with this conversation and conversations moving forward is just to continue to offer a safe space for people to talk about this and for people to continue to heal. And so I have a very special guest today, Rachel Upham, and she has thankfully joined us. I'm excited to hear her story, which is very, very interesting. And so before we get started, let's just kind of take a deep breath. So I want to invite everyone to kind of just, if you want, close your eyes or just kind of relax your eyes. Take a deep inhale through your nose and then exhaling through your mouth. Let's do one more time. Inhale and exhale. Okay. So Rachel, tell us a little bit about, well, before that, I want to tell you guys a little bit of my story. So I had a transplant. Well, I was diagnosed with liver disease when I was 17 years old. My father had just received a liver transplant about a year before I was diagnosed. And so I received the transplant when I was 31. And so I danced professionally. I taught. I had most of my career has been as a dance professional. And so in the most recent years, I've become a therapist, holistic healer, to help people through movement, spiritual healing, and mental health. So that's just a tad bit about me. So Rachel, tell us a little bit about your background, your personal history, and your transplant journey.
Yeah, so thank you so much for having me, by the way, especially being the first person to do this. It's really exciting. So my transplant journey started basically around 3 weeks old. I was told that I had biliary atresia, and with that, I needed to get a transplant. My liver basically didn't work, and it didn't work when I was born. There's a lot of science and medical terminology to it, but that's the gist. And so when I was 18 months, I got my first liver transplant. It was actually a living donor transplant from my father. He gave me a part of his liver and everything. And then unfortunately, that liver did not fully take. There was issues with blood flow with it. And so I needed to get a second transplant. And I got one at the age of 3. And I was living in New Orleans at the time. That's where I'm originally from. And we went to California actually to have the second transplant done. It was in 1994. It was a very big deal at that time. It still would be really to this day. Having a transplant so young, having a transplant, there's so many complications. Having one so young is just a totally different thing. So yeah, and then I lived as a normal transplant kid for many of years. I took about 18 different medicines. I missed many, many, many days of school to where I got held back from kindergarten when I was young. And then when I was about 7 or 8, something started happening with my eyes. And I actually had lymph nodes in my eyes, in my irises. With that, the doctors decided to take me off of immunosuppressant medication and do something else. I'm not exactly sure what. It's one of those things where they just did a lot of experimentation. And so what happened with that process, though, was after getting tested every day, all the time, all of that stuff, they discovered that my body was accepting my liver.
Okay.
And it wasn't rejecting it without immunosuppressants. And so, because of that very crazy experience, I actually have been immunosuppressant free since I was about 8 years old. So I was only on for about 5 years, and that is extremely rare. Um,
Mhm.
I tell people all the time, I really haven't met many other people like me who have had multiple transplants or any transplants for that matter, and are not taking medication for it.
Oh
Uh,
yeah.
I went
I
to,
want to go
yeah,
back. And so you said you were very young. Did you remember the second one, or like what do you actually? Because a lot of the story is probably as it was told back to you and in pictures and people around you telling you the story. But like, what about like I guess the recovery part or the transplant part? Do you remember when you were really really young, like before 7?
yeah. So I remember a lot of stuff about being in the hospital
Mm-hmm.
and also being at Ronald McDonald Children's
Mm-hmm.
House. That was a big place that me and my family stayed a lot. Um, and I remember getting sick a lot. As for the transplant itself, I definitely don't have any memory about the first one. It is all what my parents tell me, what aunts, uncles, babysitters, my sister, everything, what they tell me and what they went through. Um, and then I guess ergo what I went through as well.
Yes.
Um, and then when I was 3, the second transplant, I have some memories. And I would say none of them are bad memories, the ones that I have kept.
Mm-hmm.
Um, they are memories of getting stuffed animals, of playing arts and crafts, or playing on the little jungle gym that they had inside for the
Mm-hmm.
kids. I was obsessed with playing Life, the board
Oh, the
game.
board game.
Yes, the board
Yeah.
game, not just Life itself.
I'm
I
curious. I'm curious about how this impacted. You said you had a sister, how it impacted, and then your father gave you
mhm.
a part of his liver. So I'm wondering how it impacted him, I guess health wise and emotionally, how it impacted your family as caregivers, and then how you processed that as such a young child.
Yeah. So it's one of those things where I was always very close with my dad.
Hmm.
Always have been, always will be. And I think the transplant really has something to do with that. He was the only person that I knew that had a scar exactly like mine. My scar is very big. It's very deep. It's what in the transplant world we call a Mercedes scar. Um, and it kind of grew with me as well because I was so little.
Hmm.
So growing up, not only knowing you were different, but
Hmm.
also being able to see it on your body was really difficult for me. And
Hmm.
my dad was the only person that I knew that had a scar just like me, and he showed it off.
Oh, that's beautiful.
Mhm. He was very, very proud, and still is to this day, very proud of being a living donor, of having
Hmm.
that scar, of showing it off, of everything like that. I have memories of my dad playing beach volleyball and just, taking off his shirt and him just being like, yep, I saved my daughter.
That's really sweet. So what about like classmates? Like did people like your school friends know? Like did was this something that because I think I remember you said that this was like one of the first surgeries for children?
So it was the second the first transplant
Mhm.
was the first successful living donor liver transplant in Louisiana.
That's history. That's historical.
And I know that my second transplant was also very rare, very new, and from what I've been told, not there wasn't really anyone else that age, that young, that
Hmm.
had survived.
Wow.
Um, so everything, many of things that I did that happened to me were experimental. Um,
Mm-hmm.
and so it was very interesting. So the the thing is, I was very open about telling people
Okay.
about the transplants at a very young age. I'm pretty sure, like the first or second day of kindergarten, I got in trouble because I showed my scar to all of my friends.
Wow.
And that was when I also realized not anyone else
Yeah. This is different.
has that, and not anyone else has been in a hospital like me. You know, these were kids in kindergarten. They were saying the last time I was in a hospital was when I was born. Yeah. And Neo's, oh, I've lived in a hospital for days and weeks and months.
Mhm. It sounds like you found strength in that, though, in telling that story, and like it wasn't something that was shameful.
It was not. It was my parents made sure that I never felt shame for
Yeah.
for how my scar looked, what I had been through and everything like that. I was told at a very young age that I was a miracle.
Mhm.
And in when you're young, it's not something that you want to hear that often. You're like, okay, yeah, uh-huh. But as I have grown, become an adult, learned more about my medical history and my life, um, it truly was a miracle and is a miracle
Yeah,
that
definitely.
I am alive at all. It's also something that there were things that happened that we couldn't really hide it from kids.
Mm-hmm.
You know, when I had my lymph nodes, I had an A line in,
Ooh, gotcha.
and and so I was the weird kid with a medical device strapped to my arm.
Mhm.
Not something really you can
Yeah,
say, oh, it's just this.
yeah.
It did become a fun thing to start telling people that I was bit by a shark or an alligator. Um, because sometimes it just was a lot, you
Yeah.
know. I still, I know kids never meant to,
Mm-hmm.
but I got a lot of
Yeah.
happened.
That's that. Yeah.
And
But it
as a
sounds
kid, it
like
was,
as a child, you were very resilient. I mean, children are very resilient, and it's something that it sounds like this is something that you didn't know anything
I didn't
different.
know anything
So
different. That is
you're
true.
just moving through life with this thing that's different, but still, it's still you. It sounds like there is still a lot of joy and resilience in your journey as a young child.
I have a lot of joy in my life currently and from my past.
Yeah.
Um, my parents worked really hard on making sure that I was a quote unquote regular kid.
Hmm.
It helped that I had an older sister who was 5 years older than me. So she kind of set the standard, you
Hmm.
know, was, well, she got to do this, she got to do gymnastics, so Rachel gets to do gymnastics, you know, that sort of stuff. Um, and then, I mean, you know, I had piano practice, I did ballet, and then I fell in love with swimming and became a hardcore swimmer for 10 years. That's what
Okay.
that's what I did. And that really helped, I think, a lot with my mental health
Hmm.
growing up. Having that activity and something that I was good at too.
Hmm.
So
So since you said mental health, let's go ahead and jump into mental health and emotional. And so you kind of just answered some of that, but as you got older, like what kind of mental health challenges did you face along the way? I mean,
yeah,
you can share what you feel comfortable sharing, but just how, as you started to understand like how serious it was and everything that you had been through, like looking back, like how did that impact you mentally?
I know it impacted me a lot. And I'm still learning about it to this day at 34 years old. It's one of those things where I know I went through a lot of medical trauma in my
Mhm.
past, but I don't fully remember all of it.
Mhm.
So sometimes it just comes up. I was that kid that didn't like to be hugged for
Mhm.
way too long. I think that has to do with the fact that, doctors would just grab me, poke me, do shots, all that stuff and everything, and I didn't really have a say.
Mhm.
Um, I was when I got older, I was very big on boundaries, probably more so than how most kids are.
Mhm.
Um, and then when I was 17, I really discovered that I had depression and anxiety, and that took over my life for a while. Um, it was one of those things where I felt different than
Mhm.
everyone else. I felt different than my peers at school. And I felt different than the people that I went to camp with. I went to a transplant camp, and I even felt different there because I was in this world where I was a chronically ill person, but I kind of got better and
Mhm.
everything. And so I just never felt like I fit in. Um, I always felt like a bother to everyone. I learned later on that I really deal with imposter syndrome,
Mhm.
and imposter syndrome of living. It's
Mhm.
one of those things where, why doesn't this person like me? Why doesn't this group like me? Well, I wasn't supposed to be alive anyways, so that's probably why.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Thank you for sharing that. And that's, I think we talked about this, survivor's guilt.
Hmm.
And I think that's something that is maybe not talked about in the transplant community,
Mm-mm.
especially with people who have deceased donors. Um, is there anything that you feel has helped you work through that?
So I have done a lot of work in my life with my mental health. I was always a person that I really loved mental health. I was always empathetic.
Mhm.
Um, and I just got people really well. And so, um, when I realized that I was going through depression, going through anxiety, I told people, I was that 17-year-old that said, I'm not okay. I need help.
Mhm.
I need to talk to someone. And eventually I did. And now, don't get me wrong, I didn't do it the best way. There was times where I like had a panic attack at school and
Mhm.
everything and all of that. But you know, I was made sure that I took care of myself, and I've still continued to do that. I
Mhm.
have been on medication for mental health since I was 21. Um, I have stayed on it through. I have been on many different types of medication. I have done talk therapy. I have done CBT. I have done DBT. I have done EMDR.
Mhm. So these are for people who don't know. I know you're a social worker. I'm a social worker. So these are therapy modalities that have specific things that each one does. So like CBT, cognitive behavior therapy, DBT, dialectical behavior therapy. So there are different modalities, EMDR, that specific therapists might use, or every therapist might not use CBT.
Yeah.
So these are just different modalities. And a lot of times what happens is when people are in therapy for many, many years, if they have different therapists, they've experienced these different modalities.
Hmm.
So I just kind of explain
Thank you. Yeah.
that.
Um, I feel like EMDR maybe did the most in such a short amount of time,
Mhm.
um, with trauma, especially.
Mhm.
That was where I really, if you've ever done EMDR, do it multiple times, never just do it once. And sorry, that's my little spiel. Um, and then, but it really helps with trauma, especially childhood trauma.
Mhm.
And it was one of those things where being able to own that trauma
Mhm.
and see it for how it was and not let it control me,
Okay.
really changed a lot of things about me with how I saw my future.
Mhm.
I was never a future person.
Mhm.
I
And I think
really,
that, especially in the transplant community, is like you and people with chronic illness, you never know when you're going to get sick. You never know when your body's going to shut down. You never know, okay, is it going to reject today? And you said that you had not been on immunosuppressants for years. So I'm sure in the back of your mind, you're like, okay, how are we going to do this week, this month, this year?
yes, it's always been in the back of my mind. It's always been a thing. I've always been someone who maybe plans a year in advance, thinks about stuff, never 5, 10 years,
Mhm.
anything like that. And I have gotten sick before. I got sick a little over 5 years ago where I was hospitalized for 2 weeks. I became jaundice again, and it was one of those things where we didn't know if
Mhm.
the liver was rejecting. Um, we didn't know if I was going to have to be back on immunosuppressants.
Mhm.
And that was a big moment for me where I realized that I am just like any other transplant patient, where
Mhm.
at any moment of time, I could get sick again.
Yeah.
And in the last 5 years, I've really worked on that. I've really
Mhm.
worked on not being scared about having a future
Mhm.
and believing in the future. So, one thing that I'm doing now for therapy is ketamine treatment.
Mhm.
That
Which I would
has,
say is still very experimental in the therapy community.
yes, it is. It's very experimental. Um, it has really helped with my survivor's guilt.
Mhm.
I am someone that not only do I have a deceased donor, but I'm also really healthy
Mhm.
compared to almost every other transplant patient.
Well, I want to say that everybody is different. And
It's
I know in this chronic illness world, we like to compare we get on these, we kind of talked about this before. We get on these Facebook groups, these support groups, and we're like, okay, well, how much program are you taking? Well, how much of this are you taking? And how long have you, it's like we get into this comparison game of, okay, well, where do I stand in relation to other people? But it's really, everybody is different.
it
And
is.
so,
And
yeah.
that's the thing. Everyone's different. And trust me, my favorite game is who has the cooler scar. Um,
I
that's
don't have a Mercedes. I just have my dad. Well, I think my dad does, but I have just like an upside down smile, so it's like a frame.
it. Love it.
Some people I've seen the L.
Hmm.
Yeah,
Yeah, some people have an L. Some people just have a line now,
I don't
and
know how
it's
that
just,
works.
I've seen it. It's amazing.
I haven't seen it. But we wear our scars proudly. Um, so career. So we kind of got into therapy and social work. So how did you get into social work, or what kind of? Tell me, like, walk us through your career path.
Yeah. My career path has always is very, very personal, and I think everyone's is. So, um, the biggest thing for me is I knew I wanted to work and help people. I was always really good at that. And that was not my plan at all. My plan, my senior year of high school, was to do broadcast journalism. and try to be a DJ for a country music station. That was my plan. And then I had a very, very close, very good friend from transplant camp pass away very suddenly. His name is Alec, and he was a double lung recipient. He's a good friend of mine. Absolutely love him. And when he passed, it was the first time I ever cried because someone passed away. Death was always around me. I was always so used to it. And it was that moment that I realized I wanted to be a social worker. And I wanted to help transplant patients. I wanted to help the transplant world. I wanted people to understand that it's not just important before a transplant, but also after. So I got my degree in sociology. I then got a master's in social work. I have done so many things in the transplant community. I have been an actual social worker for transplant patients at Tulane University Medical Center in the abdominal transplant unit. I was an intern there. Absolutely loved it. I then, when I got my master's, I worked for Southwest Transplant Alliance, which is one of the organ procurement agencies in the country, and I got to be a family care coordinator. If you don't know what that is, watch The Pit. It's the best way to put it is watching an episode from the HBO show The Pit. But really what it is, yeah, they show it really well. But basically, I was the person that spoke to family members when their loved ones were passing about organ donation. It was an amazing, wonderful experience. And it was something that, of course, was very close to me. But I also knew a lot about. I was very well educated about it. My uncle is also a recipient. He had a kidney transplant. So and then I had many friends who were transplant recipients as well. So I was able to talk about that through many different ways.
I'm just curious how you felt. So with your mental health, the things that you were going through, you talked about anxiety, depression, and just your whole journey up to that point. Like, what was that like talking to families about organ donation?
Sometimes a little scary.
Yeah.
Sometimes I had imposter syndrome. Other times I felt like this is what I was meant to do.
So do you ever, so we talked about survivor's guilt. So do you ever in those moments or even moments now think, okay, well, I'm here for a reason. Yes, this happened. And yes, I'm here because of this gift and this other person, but I'm going to take that gift and honor them and continue to do this work. Did that ever cross your mind?
Oh, all the time. Maybe every day, honestly. It's one of those things where I believe that I am here for a reason. I believe everyone is here for a reason. I also realize though that I don't need to know my purpose of why I'm here. I think in my mental health, it was always, I need to know my purpose. I need to know this. I need to know that. And I kind of made myself go a little crazy. I put a lot of pressure on myself. And I've put pressure on myself my whole life because of that. And so now I'm a very spiritual person, and I am someone who believes whatever is supposed to happen will happen. You know, I don't work in the transplant community anymore. I would love to one day. I'm not opposed or anything towards it. It's just something that I've been able to pursue other things too, kind of see what Rachel is like outside of being the
Ooh.
miracle transplant kid.
Oh, tell me more. I love that. I mean, we label ourselves all these things, but it's like, okay, yeah, who is Rachel outside of this?
Well, and that's the thing. I always bring it back to the book A Fault in Our Stars, where I read it, love it.
Hmm.
And when the main guy character asks the girl, like, what's your story? And she's like, oh,
Hmm.
I told you my medical story. And he's like, no, 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 no. What's your real story? Like, who are you? I
Yeah.
remember I had just graduated from college and I read that. And I remember thinking, who am I?
Mhm.
If I didn't have my transplants, even with my transplants, who am I? You know,
Ooh.
I don't have to just be Rachel, two-time liver recipient.
That's deep.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that is a wonderful, profound question. Yeah.
Mhm.
So you mentioned spirituality, so we can kind of start talking about that. So do you ever feel connected, like spiritually, to your donor? And in research and different stories, specifically more so with heart transplant patients,
Mhm.
there are stories of like this kind of connection
Right.
of where the recipient would start feeling things that the donor did. And I don't know my deceased donor or their family, so I wrote a letter to them. I don't know if that was something that you had an opportunity to do, but when I talk to people in the community, most people do, and most people don't get responses.
Mhm.
And so I'm wondering if you feel like there's a connection or if there's something you thought about.
So I have always wondered if there
Mhm.
is a connection. I feel very connected to my donor. I don't know much about my donor though. I know that he was a young boy around 10 years old, passed away in a
Mhm.
car crash. Um,
How did you know that information? I'm curious.
my parents,
Oh,
and they were told that.
interesting.
That's,
Okay.
yeah. Um, and the family has never contacted us back or anything like that. But I've always found it interesting, I've been kind of more of a tomboy in my life than a girly girl.
Mhm.
And I always say it's because I have a male's liver. Um, I always say that. I always say I'm a little bit more like a guy in some ways. I like football. I was big into Pokemon and stuff. I'm a huge nerd. Just stuff that now, of course, women are like, I like that too. Like, come on, Rachel. But I was
Yeah.
just always that. I didn't either wore dresses all the time, and then I never wore them at all. Like, it was,
Hmm.
yeah.
Do you ever feel like there were moments beyond medicine that have helped you? Like not just, I mean, you're throughout your lifetime and, being in the hospital, doctors, and all that.
Yeah. So first and foremost, my camp that I
Mhm.
went to it for 11 years.
Oh,
I started going when I was 8. If anyone is watching and sees this lovely poster in the background,
oh, I lost your sound. I can't hear you.
can you hear me now?
Okay. Yeah,
Okay, I'm
good.
so sorry. Yeah, this poster is the camp that I went to. I've
Okay.
had that poster since I was 8. Um,
Oh.
that changed my whole world. I didn't know anyone like me. The
Mhm.
closest thing was my dad. And going to camp and meeting 8-year-olds, 9-year-olds, 10-year-olds who also
Mhm.
had transplants who understood me was just amazing. You know, the connection that I feel with other
Mm-hmm.
people when I meet them and they've had a transplant as well is more impactful, I think, than anything I've really ever been through.
Mm-hmm.
You know, I talked about this in the very beginning. Transplant can see it feels very lonely.
Mm-hmm.
Even growing up, I felt alone the whole time. I felt like it was just me.
Yeah.
And then I went to camp and I realized it wasn't just me. You
Mm-hmm.
know, other kids understood where I was coming from. Um, when you've been sick, you're kind of a little different. You know, you look at people's veins and see, ooh, those are really cool. Yes, you can be Rachel. You know, I didn't have anyone like that.
Yeah.
You know, saying, oh, I've gotten an IV. They tried to do an IV in my head one time, but they had to do it in my neck. Yeah, and other people, of course, are like, oh my
Yeah.
goodness. And anyone who
Mhm.
had a transplant is like, yeah, right? Like, oh, let me show you mine. Let me show you my scars and all of
Yeah.
that.
That's
Um,
beautiful. I mean, to have that at that age and during that time period. Where was the camp
it's
at? What state?
it's in California.
Okay, California.
Mhm.
Cool. It would be in California, of course.
It's
Not in the South.
beautiful. And the thing is, too, they treated us just like kids.
Hmm.
So we had arts and crafts, we had drama, we went to the beach, we did ropes courses. You know, one of my favorite things that I love to talk about is this girl named Bree who went to camp with us. She was in a wheelchair and she actually did the ropes course with us. And she just climbed this big
Wow.
old redwood tree all by herself and everything. You know, we were unstoppable.
And then is that different from, I wonder if that's different from like regular PE at school where people may be like, oh, well, no, she can't do that.
You know, they were worried when I went to school about physical sports.
Hmm.
I didn't do many team sports. Uh,
Hmm.
it helped that I was a
Hmm.
swimmer, and they were like, "Oh, low impact, great." Um, I remember I really wanted to play soccer, like my sister, and I believe my parents were terrified.
Probably.
Um, I played basketball in middle school, and I know they were terrified of that.
Yeah.
Um, it was definitely one of those things where, whether it was meant to or not, I felt
Hmm.
like a porcelain doll growing
Hmm.
up,
Hmm.
you know? So there's that.
Okay. So as you've gotten older, I know we're kind of jumping a little bit, but as when you're saying stuff is making me think, okay, well, what about this? So as you got older, like what about like relationships? Like how did you navigate telling people, sometimes your partner may feel a certain kind of way. Like how have you navigated that?
Oh,
That's a big
it's a
question.
huge
That's a
question,
curveball.
but I love it. I love it.
That's a curveball.
I've really never been asked it, and so I'm so excited. Um, Relationships were difficult for me from time to time, but I was always honest, probably too honest in some ways.
Yeah.
I told people first dates, you know, hey, I've had 2 liver transplants. I had this, I have that, all of that stuff. Yes, I was very open and honest about it. And I decided in my 20s that I was always going to be that way. I wasn't
Mhm.
going to hide my transplant.
Mhm.
So, and it's a part of me. It made me who I am. I am a transplant kid. I am this amazing, awesome person
Mhm.
because of my transplants.
Mhm.
Um, I was very, very lucky to meet a wonderful man who was in nursing school at the time and is now a
Mm.
nurse.
Oh, that's you. Hey, you lucked out on that
Did
one.
I did look out on that one. He was very understanding very quickly. I, you know, I met him right after I got sick.
Okay.
No, 5 years ago, I met him right after I got
Hmm.
sick, about 6 months after, and I was very not sure about dating
Hmm.
because
Mm.
I thought, well, I'm a lot of responsibility.
Yeah.
I'm going to be a lot, like someone's going to have to take care of me,
Hmm.
mostly me. And yes, relationships are a two-way streak, and sometimes you give more than you take and all of that stuff. But
Hmm.
I felt bad about it.
Mm.
And I remember telling him our first date about getting sick, about getting jaundice, and
Hmm.
saying, it's probably going to happen again. I'm probably going to get sick again at some point in time within the next 5 to 10 years, because that's just what I thought. And he looks at me and he says, well, of course you're going to get sick again. That's what happens. And everyone else in my life that I dated at that time had always said, you don't know that, Rachel. But as a transplant person,
Hmm.
you're told it your whole life.
Hmm.
And I felt finally seen for the first time.
Mm.
I didn't have to explain anything to him.
Yeah. Yeah.
I've always had to explain everything to everyone
Yeah.
in relationships.
But he got it.
He got it, and he got
Good.
it right away.
Right over here. Oh my gosh. That's so beautiful. And I'm so happy that you have found that. 'Cause relationships are hard when you have chronic illness. I mean, relationships are hard, period. Okay, just throw that out there. But just adding other things into the mix when, the body is so unpredictable.
Mm-hmm. He's been great through my transplant journey, through my mental health journey.
Hmm.
Um, he's been a wonderful support. And he is a typical nurse. He is mean. He doesn't let me, he
Take
just,
your medicine.
yeah, yes, he doesn't let me get away with stuff.
That's funny. Yeah.
Other people,
Ah.
it's been one of those things where it's just like, oh, I get it. I use the liver card, and he'll just stare at me and he's like, no, I don't care. And yeah, he makes sure that I take medicine. He asks, did you take this medicine? Maybe not. You need to take this. That's how he is.
Yeah. Good. Good for you. Yeah. All that medicine. Ooh. Okay, so that was a detour. But thanks for sharing that. I mean it's having someone to, be a partner in this life and this journey is important and it's
I didn't
helpful.
really think I would find that,
Hmm.
honestly. Um, and then especially around my late 20s, I kind of just gave up on that.
Hmm.
And then when I met him, it was one of those things where this is what I've been missing from
Hmm.
every other relationship. They always say like when you know, and
Hmm.
but it was the truth.
Okay. So we kind of talked about everything a little bit, mental health, a little bit of spirituality, career, relationships. Are there any um, practices or things that you do just to kind of bring all these things together, just for overall wellness and well-being, like mind, body, spirit, any kind of thing that you do, rituals, routines to kind of help you stay centered, stay focused, just knowing that you have all these things going
Yeah.
on.
Um, I'm really into prayer, as
Hmm.
simple as that sounds. I believe in a higher power and everything like that. That's just what I call it, just because I'm comfortable with that. And I pray. I
Hmm.
pray every day. I pray sometimes twice a day.
Hmm.
I let my higher power try to take control. Um,
Mm-hmm.
I tried to control me and my body and everything for so long because,
Mm-hmm.
you know, everyone else had say over it.
Right.
You know, and my parents were really amazing advocates to me when it came to that. But it's one of those things where now I pray about it. I
Mm-hmm.
talk to my higher power. I say that I'm friends with them. You know,
Mm-hmm.
there are some times where I'm mad at them.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes I'm still angry to this day that I've had my transplants. I'm very grateful. I'm very proud.
Mm-hmm.
But growing up, there were times where it was difficult,
Mm-hmm.
you know, and sometimes I get frustrated. I'm a
Mm-hmm.
human.
Yeah.
I have a great relationship with my spirituality now,
Mm-hmm.
and I make sure that I pray at least once a day. Um,
And has that changed over time? Is that something that, like, what made you, is that something that you did like as a child, or is that something that you've grown into, or like what made you have this powerful connection with prayer?
yeah, so I actually I got sober. I
Okay.
stopped drinking and everything like that and went to AA, and it really helped. I was always a spiritual person. I always believed in what people call God. That's just, I went to an Episcopalian school, so it's just what I knew. And I was really mad about
Mm-hmm.
it. I didn't I didn't like it. I didn't like what my story was when I was young. And unfortunately, because of that, um, I have drank alcohol.
Mm-hmm.
But at 25, I realized I was I would lose my liver if
Mm-hmm.
I didn't stop. And I haven't had alcohol since then. I went to
Okay.
AA. They talked about spirituality. They talked about a God of your understanding. And I really took that to heart and
Mm-hmm.
made it my my thing.
Yeah, that's powerful. I mean, yeah, it is. I mean, to have something to believe in to help you be a better you
Hmm.
is
And
inspirational.
I am a huge believer in it. When I got sick 5 years ago, I was actually 3 years sober.
Hmm.
Um,
Did that make you angry that you got sick?
yes,
Yeah.
I was jaundiced. I've only ever been jaundiced when sober.
Hmm.
Yeah. I mean, granted, I was a kid, so yeah.
Yeah.
But I like to say that joke. I was very angry, but I was also so grateful
Mm.
because what had happened was my bile ducts had just got infected
Hmm.
because that's what biliary atresia is. Your bile ducts don't work
Yeah.
and all of that stuff. And so this was happening again. If I had been drinking while that had happened, I would have lost the liver.
Hmm.
That was a big wake up moment for me.
Yeah. Yeah.
Was I can get sick at any time with no fault of, it's not like I did something.
Yeah.
And it was scary, but also beautiful. And I really felt like my higher power was there for me at that moment.
Hmm.
You that I never understood why I decided to get sober at 25.
Hmm.
And then I got sick at 28.
Yeah.
I think I believe in connections. I
Yeah, me
believe
too.
in full circles. I believe
Yeah.
that everything happens for a reason, even if you never find out what that reason is.
Yeah.
And I very much believe that that was a big reason.
Okay. Well, thanks for sharing that. Um, it's it's almost been an hour, and I have so many questions. I mean, just hearing the things that you have said so far has been inspirational. You've been through a lot, and you're very strong. And I mean, it just sounds like you are moving through life with this focus of being a better you. And so I just want to commend you on that because it's hard. This journey is hard. It is isolating. So I just have a couple more questions and then we'll kind of wrap up.
Yeah.
So is there like your relationship to your body? Um, do you feel like how do you feel about that? I mean, I know that's a weird question,
No, it's
but
not. It's not a weird question for a transplant recipient.
yeah.
In some ways, I got lucky because I was so young. So I don't
Mm-hmm.
know what I look like without my scar. I have
Mm-hmm.
I have no idea. Couldn't tell you and all of that. Because of that, though, it's been a tough journey.
Mm-hmm.
You know, it's one of those things where you are reminded every single day
Mm-hmm.
that someone passed away for you to
Mm-hmm.
be alive. I think that's really where survivor's guilt digs in, is
Mm-hmm.
that daily reminder.
Mm-hmm.
When you look at yourself in the mirror and you see your scar,
Mm-hmm.
you know, you look at me now. My dad always says, you would never know Rachel had a transplant unless you saw her in a bikini. It's
Yeah.
true. You would never know. That's kind of how it is in a lot of situations.
Mm-hmm.
Everything. My relationship with my body has always been a tough one.
Mm-hmm.
You know, I've always been a smaller person as well. I used food to control my life,
Mm-hmm.
just have some control over something.
Yeah.
Um, and so
Or safe.
that's been a really big journey
Mm-hmm.
for me. Um, you know, I have not liked my body for many years. I have not liked my scar for many years. Now I love it. Now I'm very proud,
Mm-hmm.
but it took a lot of time and a lot of staring to
Mm-hmm.
to get the confidence that I have now.
Mm-hmm.
So
Okay. Thanks. Yeah. It's I mean everybody's different
yeah,
and I'm hearing you tell your story kind of from front to back and back to front, and I'm just wondering, like, now on this end, how have you? And it sounds like you've told when you were younger, kind of working through
mhm.
it, you were telling yourself a specific story, but it sounds like now you've kind of rewritten this story, this narrative, about Rachel and your life. And so I'm hearing that new narrative as you're talking.
Yeah, I think when I was young, I always felt ashamed
Mm-hmm.
that I had my transplant in one way or another. I don't fully understand it. I'm still working on it in therapy. You know, it's just one of those things. But I never felt comfortable in my own skin.
Mm-hmm.
And now I'm proud that I'm a transplant recipient. I know that it was no one's fault that I got sick. I can't blame anyone. And I have to be okay with that.
Mm-hmm.
I have to learn, I've learned to accept who I am. And I
Mm-hmm.
think that's hard no matter what.
Yeah, that's true. That's true.
but I do know who I am. I've always been very confident about who I am.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe it's because of being in the hospital and all of that stuff, and you gain a weird self-confidence in the hospital. You're very, it's very like, I can do
That
anything.
yeah, I've never thought about it like that, but that is interesting because I see where that could come from.
Yeah. It's one of those things where it's like, oh, I dealt with this. This is fine.
Yeah, yeah,
This is
yeah.
no big deal.
That's nothing.
Yeah. But I lived life a lot, a lot like that.
Hmm.
Um, and now, again, I just have so much love for who I am.
Mm-hmm.
I thought that being different was bad. And now I know every single person is different. Every single person has their own story. My
Hmm.
story is just kind of cool.
Yeah, very
It's
cool.
very cool. Yeah, it's a great story.
Yeah, it really is. Okay, so is there any advice that you would give to someone who is waiting for an organ transplant or someone who's received an organ transplant? Maybe that's two different questions, but just what, I guess, advice or suggestions based on your experience and your story would you give?
Yeah. First off, do research, talk to
Mm.
people who have had organ transplants as well. I've noticed over time and seeing other people who have had transplants and go through the motions and all that stuff, it's not something that's talked about so much where you have the organ transplant and then you still have it.
Yeah,
It's not you get the transplant
that's it.
and that's it.
Yeah.
This is a lifelong journey. Welcome. It can suck. It can. It's beautiful and amazing, and you are not alone. There are hundreds of thousands of people who are just like you, who are experiencing what you have experienced, who have been through what you have been through.
Hmm.
And it's so important to talk to them and say, what was it like? What
Hmm.
happened? You know, how are you now?
Hmm.
I think it's important to talk about survivor's guilt.
Yeah.
I think it's important to talk about all the medical trauma that you've been through before. I think therapy is very, very important. I know it is. You know, the biggest thing that I have for someone is, again, you are not alone. You will feel you will feel alone, but you are not alone. And stand up for yourself.
Yeah.
You are not a science experiment. You are not someone's career. You are not someone's job. It is your life. Stand up. Speak for yourself. Learn boundaries. I mean,
Yeah.
it sounds silly, but it's
No.
so important, you And to people who are caregivers, first off,
Mm.
thank you. Oh my
Yeah.
goodness, thank you. To family, to friends, my mom, I was asking her the other day about stuff, and she said, it's the little things that she remembers.
Hmm.
Someone bringing food to them,
Hmm.
someone taking over one of their shifts to be with me so they could go shower, so they could go see their other daughter.
Hmm.
For me, when I got sick, Facebook messages, people
Hmm.
calling, talking to me, it meant the world.
Yeah.
Because when you're stuck in a hospital bedroom with two IVs attached to you and you can't move, all you got is who comes to you.
Hmm.
And just, I think that's a big thing to remember. Unfortunately, you're going to have to come to them. And it's okay as a transplant patient to not have to wait for people. don't feel bad.
Mhm.
You're not a bother. And I think that's just so important. And people need to remember that.
That is, I mean, that spoke to me. That is great advice. I mean, everything that you said, I'm like, yep, all of the above,
Mm-hmm.
all of the above. Well, thank you so much for sharing your story. I mean, this has been such a beautiful, insightful conversation. I hope that we continue to build our relationship. I mean, just hearing your story, it's amazing. And just learning about your strength and your perseverance has really made my day. And I hope that the viewers have enjoyed the conversation as
I hope so too.
well. So, I will have more conversations like this with other people in the organ transplant community, also people in the creative and arts, performing arts community. So I'm a therapist and holistic healer for people in the organ transplant community and for artists. And so if you know anyone or if you are in either one of these communities, you can feel free to reach out to me and we can talk about your story as well. But thank you, Rachel. Thank you all for joining us, and I hope everyone has a great day.
Thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate it. And hi to my mom and my family. That's for sure.
All right. Take care. See y'all later.
Bye.